Welcome to this week's project on composition. So this is going to be a 2-week project. This is part one of the 2 weeks, and we're going to focus on line. So we're building upon the previous weeks, and next week we're going to focus on value. So you keep on building and repeating those skills. So what is composition? You could spend forever learning about this. So we're going to go over some of the basics, and you can always be learning about composition as you evolve as an artist. So composition is basically how you arrange the things in your image, in your drawing, in your photo, whatever it is. It's where you place different elements, whether they're people, as in figures, or objects for a still life, as we're going to do now, or a landscape. The artist really can choose what to emphasize in the composition. So there's a lot of ways to make a good composition, or you'll hear a strong composition. There's so many different factors, and everyone has their own opinion of what looks great, right? Ultimately, it's up to you, you're the artist, to find your own composition techniques. There are a lot of rules that people have made about composition, and I put that in quotes because I think, artists are really good at breaking the rules, and sometimes the most innovative works come from artists who break the rules. So I never want you to feel like you're stuck following a set of rules. These are just kind of some guidelines that you can try, and really what I recommend is noticing what you like about different artists' compositions, what you think stands out, and finding your own way of creating interesting compositions. These are just I know they're not drawings, they're photographs that I took for the purpose of explaining composition to students. So that's why they're photos and not drawings. Because sometimes it's hard to find exactly the right thing from a museum or a gallery or an artist's website. So perspective is one really great way, and it doesn't have to be perspective in a landscape. We'll see some still life paintings and drawings that have perspective in it. So what it does is really create depth, and it draws the viewer. The viewer is like anyone looking at your art, into the image. So it brings them in. And in this case, it's created with the road becoming more narrow, and then the, fence post getting smaller and smaller. And then we're going to learn a lot about perspective coming up in another project. But just having these kind of lines going back into the scene can draw people in. Rule of thirds. You can get technical and break the image up into these thirds, and then you place the main subject in one of those intersections. Basically, you just put it off center. Putting something a little bit to the side, right, can create more interest. So just think about where you're placing the main focal part of your composition and try moving it off center. And this is one of the rules that I think is really interesting to break, because sometimes putting something in the center can be really bold too. So creative angles is another way. So we're going to be using like everyday objects, and think about looking at something from a different angle, either from below it or above it. Creating some more interest to something and seeing it in a different way than you normally look at it. And juxtaposition and contrast, which is basically just contrasting something dark against light, something that's really colorful against something that has no saturated color or is neutral. Texture is a really nice thing to contrast against something really smooth. So find things that like oppose each other, and you put them together and create a more interesting composition. So we're going to be working on still lifes, And there's a lot of important reasons why we work on still lifes. And the main one is that it's accessible. You can use everyday items from your kitchen, anything that you have, so you don't need to purchase anything. Also, you have control of the lighting. You can make sure it's not moving around. If you're drawing from a model or a person, they're going to be moving all the time, and you can't ask them to sit for you and pose for 12 hours so you can get it right. You can also, most importantly for this project with a still life, you can control the composition. You can create your own composition. And we're drawing from life because that's how you can really see how objects work in the light. You can see the three-dimensionality of them. You can see their form. And also, because of time, you have more time to practice your skills. It's a still life. It's not going anywhere. And you can take hours and hours practicing your drawing. So what I really want you to notice is the composition choices in the following works. We're going to look at some still life. So this is to show you that still life is not boring. I know sometimes students get tired of it or think it's boring. It really is a beautiful art form that is not only a great way to learn, but a great way to become an expert artist. I know this isn't drawing either, but this is, I feel like I can't talk about still life without mentioning this group known as the Dutch Masters, a group of artists from the Netherlands that are known to make these works, these masterpieces. And they're known for these still lifes, especially these florals. This is Hans Bollinger, and this was created around 1639. It's oil on canvas. And you can see this is a little off center. On the left side, there's more space of the wall. There's also a lot of contrast here between dark and light. And then the vivid colors of the flower contrasted between the more neutral background. So this is like an expert level masterpiece and not boring at all. I feel like there's a lot of movement in it. The flowers feel like they're alive. Another important part of the still life tradition is these vanitas still lifes. Vanitas means vanity in Latin, and these are a whole group of still lifes that a lot of different artists created. So it's like a type of still life, and it was a really common in European artwork starting in the 16th and 17th centuries, but I still see artists today creating vanitas artworks. So it's a good art term to know. Here's a definition about vanitas still lifes from the Tate Museum. Again, anything that has an underline on it is going to be linked for you so you can find more information, and the PDF with the links and stuff will be in your class, in your online class. So the Tate Museum says, the still life includes various symbolic objects designed to remind the viewer of their mortality and of the worthlessness of worldly goods and pleasures. And then that's from the Tate Museum in London. And then from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, they say, almost all the elements in this scene, this is about this particular painting, almost all the elements in this scene are unmistakable allusions to transience and the brevity of mortal life on earth. So these are well-known symbols in vanitas paintings. The skull, you'll often see a skull or a candle being blown out. And in this still life, we can see, the book is going back into perspective. We can also see that flute or, the stick looking thing that is in perspective too. And it's a line kind of drawing our eye back and creating that depth. We also have so much contrast between the dark and light, a lot of things in shadow. So just start to notice these things. We also have the main features off center, that rule of thirds, right? Things are kind of off to the right, and there's this big empty sort of negative dark space in the top left. So these are the objects that are used as symbols, in the 16th, 17th century. I want you to think about what could be symbols for today, right? What would be in a vanitas still life today? Similar to the Vanitas still life are Memento Mori paintings, which were also developed around the same time in Europe in the 17th century, and artists again continued to create them. This is a Pablo Picasso Memento Mori painting done in 1952. So Memento Mori is Latin for remember you must die. I know this is not the most uplifting of subjects, but when we're talking about still life, I think it's important to mention these really well-known terms and themes throughout that artists have used throughout time. So here's a definition of Memento Mori from the Tate Museum in London. They say, an artwork designed to remind the viewer of their mortality and the shortness and fragility of human life. So as you can see, it's pretty similar. This is really different. The reason I put this in is this is Picasso's still life, but we can see that it has zero perspective in it. What Picasso did, even though he could paint things realistically with depth and form, he flattened it. And this was completely unusual. People didn't always like it. People didn't know how to look at this right away. I think we get used to seeing these kind of more abstracted paintings because maybe it's hanging in your dentist office or something. But this was revolutionary at the time. It changed the way people made artwork and moved into abstraction. And there's no depth in this. We call it the picture plane. The picture plane is completely flat, kind of comes right up into our faces, and it's confrontational almost. So think about how Picasso simplified these objects. It's a goat skull, a bottle, and a candle, and made this different kind of composition that was completely, revolutionary for the time. Okay, this is Morandi, Giorgio Morandi, an Italian artist. And what he did, he was known as a hermit. I don't think he barely left his home. And he made all of these really muted still life paintings, which I feel like the colors would be popular now, even though they're made in the 50s, this blush pink and stuff that he used. So he just drew and painted the same objects over and over again. So on the left, we see a drawing in graphite and pencil from 1952. And then we can see in one of the paintings on the right that you see that same kind of broken object. So he's using the same objects repeatedly and really studying these forms. On the left, we have another drawing where it's never exactly the same, or it's an etching. An etching is a type of printmaking where you draw on a piece of metal, usually a piece of copper. So we see that vase shape. So Morandi really got great at drawing these specific objects because he did it over and over and over again. And he really studied them. And these paintings are beautiful. They're really subtle, but they make me feel calm or something. They're really neutral and they're lovely. What I did find, I was able to find a price of the painting on the right, the 1951 painting. And in May 2023, when I looked it up, it was estimated to be worth between $1 million and $1.5 million. So that's a lot for a 14 by 17 inch painting. So I think whenever I can find stuff like that, I like to share it with you. This is Ludwig Sander, an American artist, and this is a still life in charcoal. Next week, we'll be working on shading your still lifes in charcoal to get the values, to get the forms and the shading. And this is pretty large, it's 19 by 25 inches. And you can see here the balance of the still life composition, like the fruit basket is kind of tipping over and pouring onto the table. We can see the books there. The whole composition is pretty balanced. There's some space in the foreground that helps move our eye into the image. This is John Turup, sorry for the bad pronunciation, another Dutch artist. I don't have the dates that he lived, but this is from 1886, and it's a still life with a jug and a cup. It's a pencil drawing, and the reason I want to show this is so you start noticing how quick these marks are. This artist is getting their composition worked out. So pencil is a really nice way to get marks down on paper really fast, work out where you're going to place and arrange your objects. And this week, we're really going to focus on figuring out what your composition will be, and then you'll work on the composition that you choose for next week. So this artist is really blocking out the main shapes and the shadows without getting into too much detail, but filling up the page so they know what it's going to look like. Here's Henri Matisse, a very famous French artist. This is a still life from 1924, and it's charcoal, which we'll be doing next week. You'll be doing charcoal similar to this to show the volume, the roundness. And we can see this is similar to the one before where it's drawn pretty quickly. We see a lot of movement and there's not a ton of detail, but the charcoal is really getting the form down quickly with that shading. We see the lights and the darks and the contrast. And we also see some negative space in the foreground, in the, bottom right part that is helping bring our eye into those eggs and cups. And we see a nice balance of dark and light to give it interest. This is Lillian Westcott Hale, an American artist, and this is also charcoal. It's pretty big. It's 22 by 28 inches, which is pretty big. And we can see a huge contrast here between dark and light. We have that really deep shadow in the back that is offsetting this tablecloth that's sort of lightly checkered, but we can see the sun kind of bleaching it in the middle. And then we see this really intricate teapot that is beautifully shaded, but it's off to the center. I also love how this artist has the folding lines of the tablecloth. That is really hard to do, so I always think that's impressive. So notice how this simple composition, it's really just a teapot on a table, but it becomes really interesting the more you look at it. And that the checkered, I know that must have taken a long time, so we can always appreciate that. Once you start drawing, I think you start to really appreciate how much goes into creating a seemingly simple image like this. Okay, so for your sketch assignment, you're gonna work on negative and positive space. And I'm gonna demonstrate how that works and show you examples at the end of this presentation. So, negative space is what's around the object. So everything but the objects, right? And it's part of the composition too. And the reason we're focusing on this is so that you learn to make strong compositions by looking at not just the positive space, the objects themselves, but the space around them. What negative space also does is it helps you get things drawn correctly, because you can say, oh, the space between these two objects is actually a different shape, or it's bigger, so that can help you draw the objects themselves more precisely. So I want you to arrange your objects. You're going to have 3 of them that you pick from your kitchen or anywhere in your home, and make the negative space as interesting as the positive space. And this is going to help you make your compositions awesome. Another trick to check if you have a good composition is turn your drawing upside down and make sure it still looks good upside down. So what your assignment is taking 3 objects from your kitchen or any part of your home, arrange them, like I was saying, where the negative space is just as interesting as the positive space. I want you to study and observe the objects plus the space around them. And then you're creating 2 contour drawings, 2 line drawings in pencil on paper. One drawing is just going to be the negative space, one drawing just the positive space. And I'm going to show you how to do that at the end of this. But let's talk about what the project is for this week, just so you have it all in your mind. So you're going to do composition pencil drawings for your project. This is an example of, we call them thumbnails, composition thumbnails, and some people call them studies. It's basically quick practice to figure out your composition. Now, you might think you have something great at first and you might not feel like changing it, but you can always rearrange things, move things around. It's always good to try a bunch of different ways to work out your composition. I love seeing artists' composition thumbnails because we can see how their brains work. We can see how they figure out how things work. And you can see this is messy. It's done really quickly. The artist is just like thinking through the arrangement and composition of items. This is again another artist doing composition thumbnails, and we can see the outlines that I think are really important, and we're going to do that in ours. So you can really see the negative and the positive space, and you can see how this artist erased a little bit of the charcoal, and they're just filling in all the elements to see how these compositions are going to work out, to choose the one that they like the most. So for your project, you're going to take the same 3 objects from your sketch, and I mean, if you hate them and you want to try different ones, you can, but because you sketched them, you're really going to understand the items. So I would say, take your time picking the objects that you really want to work on because you're going to be working on them for 2 weeks. So you're going to try arranging them in several different compositions to find the most interesting. You're going to be thinking about that negative and positive space. You're also going to be adjusting your light so you get interesting shadow shapes and thinking about your contrast, whether it's low or high. You're going to make at least 4 composition thumbnails. So just like this, there's 4 here, right? And each of them must have a completely different arrangement. So they must look totally different, but with the same 3 objects. So you can try landscape and portrait. Don't worry, I'll show you how to do that in another video. I'll show you examples. And then you're going to pick the strongest thumbnail composition to make it into your larger drawing for next week that you will shade in charcoal and get all the values in there. So take your time, because you're going to be working on this for another entire week. So I want you to really feel good about your compositions and find something that you're excited to work on. That project demo is going to be in another video, but right now we will move on to the sketch demo. All right, so I have my 3 still life objects here that I'm going to be working with from my kitchen. And I want you to take time to set up an interesting composition where you think the negative and positive space are just as interesting. So the negative space I'm looking at is like this curve right here, this shape that's being created, this shape in here, and then against the background, and you can try just keep moving stuff around until you get it into the right spot. So really take your time with this, and it's an exercise, so it obviously doesn't have to be perfect, but I also tried choosing things that were different heights to give my composition more interest. So I have something really tall, something shorter, and then something that's flat and long, but can add like a sense of perspective. So I could even have it, moving to the back like that, or I don't know, I think I like it like this. You could even have it inside something. Really take your time and kind of see what works for you and works for your composition. So for this sketch, you're going to be making 2 sketches, one with the negative space and one with the positive space. And what we're going to do this whole week for the project too is create these outlines. So these boxes that will enclose your composition. In previous lessons, we've kind of just been drawing in the middle and letting it float. But when we're talking about composition, it's really important to know where your composition ends and begins. So I just have a regular piece of computer paper here. You can do both your sketches on the same side of the computer paper. You can make them smaller than I'm making them. I'm just making them large so that you can see them more easily. So this 8.5 piece of paper, I'm creating a 9x7 rectangle in which I will compose my composition, and I just am kind of randomly choosing that because of the paper, but in the future, and because these are just going to be sketches, but when you're going to enlarge something or making a composition for a bigger, more final drawing, you can make it proportional to what the size of your final drawing will be. Okay, so I'm going to come down. I'm measuring from the top of the paper, so I keep my lines parallel. This is just the method I've been doing. For me, it's quick and easy. If you have your own way of doing it, totally fine. But I think sometimes it's helpful to share these little quick tips. So I come from the top and I'm coming down 1/2 inch. This is the 1/2 inch mark, and I make these little like arrows because if I just make a line, the line can like kind of go up like that or down like that, you know, and it's not as precise. So I know in the center of this little arrow is where the halfway mark is. And I usually do like 2 or 3 on the long side. And so I'm just making marks at the halfway, and then I can take my ruler and kind of go in the center of each to make a quick straight line without like a T-square. So that's my top line, and then I'm making it 7 long, 7 inches this way. So I'm measuring from the top of the line. I could also measure 1 inch up from the bottom here. So that's 7, and making my mark, my arrow mark at 7, and coming and connecting those. I think I learned this in like wood shop class a long time ago, it's just awesome. And I use it for everything, even when I'm doing stuff at home, like around the house. So I'm gonna make it 9. So I'm coming here and measuring the 11, and I'm just gonna go in, since 9 is, 2 minus 11 is 9. I'm gonna come 1 inch on this side, make my mark, and 1 inch on this side. And that gives us 9. And I'll just do the same down here. Inch on this side, inch on this side. And I'll do 1 up here just for good measure. Anyone who's a carpenter knows the measure twice, cut once rule. This obviously isn't as precise as cutting lumber, but it helps. All right, and then you can just make it dark. It's okay if they overlap. So now we have our composition space worked out. We know where it's going to fit into. And if this isn't long enough, sometimes this bothers me. So you're gonna have 2 of these. I'm doing them on either side, but you could fit them on the both. And we're gonna start with the negative space. So I'm looking at my still life, and I'm looking at the shapes that are around the space. So I see between the jug, the green jug, and the glass, I see this shape here. That's kind of my center negative space shape. And then I see the glass going this way, and then the spoon is coming in. So you can start to see the negative space is creating its own shapes. And this is a way to make sure to get the proportions correct if you're doing like figure drawing or any drawing. And we see there's a little shadow shape here that I'm going to draw really lightly. I set this up because I like the shadow shape there. And then this is my spoon, and this comes up, and then I have the paper, which I'm going to make a little notation for. And this comes in, and then I want to kind of make sure this, I'm thinking about all this is the negative space, so I want to make sure this shape, I'm really getting it right. So this is the main kind of shape that I'm looking at, and this I think is a little straighter, and this is a little more narrow. So this is going to help you become more precise in your drawing, really looking at the negative space and the positive space together, and we're separating them for this sketch exercise so you can start to see how each one works. Okay, and now there is the negative space of the handle. So there's quite a lot of overlap here, and then I have this like triangle that comes into this curve, and then there's the top of the jar that's cutting into that. So I'm just the same way we've been doing, making, basic shapes, but we're just looking at it differently. We're looking at this negative space. And some people, when they do negative space drawings, you know, will shade in the whole negative part, which can be helpful too if that's helpful for your brain. I just don't want to spend a million hours on this, as fun as that would be. And then this is another interesting negative space shape here. I want to get the top. It's okay if it's not perfect. This is a study, right? We're figuring out what our space looks like. And for me, just doing some of these lines to fill in kind of helps me see where I am. And I think this needs to come out more, this shape, because I'm looking at the distance here. But I'm not going to spend too much time of your time because it's just a sketch. And then I'm looking at this space around. There's the edge of the table and the wall, and there's all this space. Now this is also going to help me when I'm working on my composition, because already I'm looking at it and I'm seeing there's this negative space here and there's this negative space here. And I think for my composition, I'm going to want to move this element over because I think that will be more interesting to have it off to the side. So this is also helping me decide, you know, figure out different compositional shapes that I could create. Okay, I'm coming back down. I see this is very distorted. It's kind of like the blind contour thing, but this is good. This is how we're learning and understanding. And sometimes I'll take it like from the edge here and see, okay, what is this space? Am I getting this space correct, this angle? And this seems very elongated to me, as I did something wrong here. So I can see that this needs to come down. And this shape on the top needs to come down too, because this is all the negative space. So this is a great way to be making adjustments and getting your shapes correct. And resist the urge to draw the objects, right? That's going to be the next one. So you can come in and adjust and get these shapes correct. So I have this shape. This is an important shape here because it's part of the focal point of the drawing. And this is another important shape that I want to spend some time on. And these objects you're going to be using over and over again. So, you know, take your time choosing them and then really take your time in this sketch study to practice getting the shapes correct. Because this negative space shape is really going to help me draw the object itself. So what I did is I put too much space here while I was thinking about the negative space, and that's of course okay, but now I'm going to come back and adjust a little bit to get that looking more correct. All right, I don't want to spend too much time. I think you can start to understand how this works, and you can keep refining these spaces. If it helps you to color it in, you can. If not, you can just make these contours and darken them so we really see that you focused on the negative space here. And let me get the bottom here. And stuff in perspective is hard, so this is where the negative space is going to help you make the correct proportions. And you can kind of, like, since this goes all the way across, I can kind of see, okay, what's this space from this line to here? Did I get that space correct? And I see there's this big empty space here too. So I can be thinking for my final compositions, do I want to crop it and move it over? Maybe I want to cut off some of this, or maybe I want to move my spoon a little bit And these are all the reasons looking at the negative space can help. Okay, I'm gonna flip over to my other side. You know, you're gonna spend a little more time on this, and now you're drawing just the contours of the positive space. So we're just practicing with these sketches. Get that one on. And this might feel a little bit easier after doing the negative space. So I'm doing the same thing we've been doing all along, and I'm even gonna move this on my composition a little bit because I'm getting the center line of this, this vase here, or this jar. And this is gonna be for the neck, this is the top line, and this is the bottom. So this is what I do even with figure drawing, or I'll make it a little darker. I know I have a light touch here. Or when I'm drawing anything, is I kind of get the main object, the length of it, and where I want it to be in the composition before drawing anything more detailed. And you can also start with straight lines. So this vase has a lot of curves, but if I start with straight lines, they're easier to get the proportions correct because I can check, okay, this is the same width here, and then I can get the neck about the same, and I'm not adding the little spout yet because that's going to be harder to draw. And then same with the handle, I can kind of go like that to get the basic shape down. Then with this jar, similar thing, I know this is kind of the center of the top, and the center of the whole thing is maybe around here. And then the bottom is more narrow, but we see where the jug is sitting, where the green jug is sitting, is higher than where the jar is sitting. So making the jar look like it's in front of the jug, we're having it overlap. That's one way, but another way is that this bottom line, they're in different places. So the lower part, the lower jar is in front of the jug because the line is lower. Okay, let me erase some of this for you. Oops. Before I go too much further, I want to get in, and I am thinking about the negative space here because we just did that, and I'm getting in that. I'm gonna ignore the little hooky thing for now, the little close. And then for the spoon, that's going across this way. So I'm just making an oval shape, and I'm making a rectangle for now. So now I have everything in place, and I can start doing what we've been doing, is just adding some of the details. And now you can see the curves are much easier to draw because I've gotten those straight lines in. So I can just curve these and make it look immediately proportional and correct without having to redraw it a bunch of times. So if you have a lot of curvy objects like mugs and vases and stuff, making them straight lines first always helps. And this spout I see is going down like that. Again, I'm just gonna draw it straight first. It is in shadow. And then I'm gonna do this jar before I start on anything else. And we're not doing any shading. This is just practicing the contours. So we see this is curved because it's a rounded jar. And there's a lot of lines in here. And then we see the top of it is an oval shape, or an ellipse. This ellipse is a circle in perspective, which is some of the hardest stuff to draw. So just take your time and do these straight lines to fill it in. And then we have the kind of lock mechanism here to make it airtight that I'm just going to draw. Gets a little messy here, so I'm just going to draw a simplified version of that for now, so I kind of get it in there. And then we can see through the bottom of this with another oval going this way. You could make your life easier and not do glass, because glass is notoriously difficult. There's also the sort of little, I don't know what this is called, but it's what makes it airtight and seals this jar up. Now this is definitely the wrong shape, and now that I've drawn the glass, I can see I need to move it up. So I'm gonna always be readjusting, and it's so much easier to redraw this thing that I only drew for like 2 minutes than if I had drawn the perfect spoon in the perfect shape. I would have been sad to erase it. I'm looking at the negative space here too, and so I think the center line of the spoon is closer, and this is more narrow. There's a curve here, and then it kind of curves at the end. And so we have we see the top of it, but also the side of it. So even though it's not showing exactly, I'm kind of making the side another line, the side plane of it, so I can get an idea of how, and I'm gonna do this for my center line like we've been doing to give myself a direction for how this thing is three-dimensional, even though we're doing just contours. Okay, let me get the last part in, and I'm curving this that I started out with it being straight, and I'm always paying attention to where it is in relation to the other objects, the other jar. And then this has a really pretty kind of that thing. There we go. All right, so this is all you need to do, a contour drawing. This spoon is a little messy, but that's okay. Just get all your shapes so you practice drawing the outlines of your shapes as well as the negative space. Remember, this is just an exercise. I'm not expecting perfection, but you're getting really acquainted with these shapes and understanding how the negative space can really give you a strong composition. And already as I was drawing this, I decided to move it over, and I think this composition is much more interesting than the first one. So we can see it's already working a little bit. All right, have fun with it.